Chapter 7. Ivy came to in a gymnasium filled with metal cots. Red Cross volunteers were tending patients and assisting the Catholic nuns, who were the regular nurses. She seemed to have a small gash on her head, but otherwise felt fine. Others around her did not seem to have fared as well. It was strange to see pastel tissue flowers and happy Easter banners hanging over beds of the wounded. A priest was making the rounds, praying for the hurt and dying. He had a kind, round face and an Irish accent, gentle in his demeanor. He looked her way and spoke to a sister that pointed at Ivy. "Hello, I'm Father Flanagan. I'm told you and a few others have lived through a miracle." "I'm a Methodist," Ivy blurted out, not certain what else to say. Father Flanagan laughed. "God loves all his children, and he must have very special plans for you." Ivy felt very confused. "I'm sorry, Father, I really don't know what you're talking about." Father Flanagan seemed eager to tell the story. "The tornado went right over your streetcar, and all around that very streetcar, homes were completely destroyed, and 2 dear babies were sucked out a window and perished," he added grimly. "But all of you, in the streetcar, were saved by the mercy of our Lord with barely a scratch." Ivy was certainly grateful, if shaken. Then Father Flanagan asked her, "Is there anything you'd like to pray about?" Ivy had only prayed little pattern prayers with her mother, finding the formal prayers of Sunday church dead and sterile. It had never occurred to her to really address God as a person. No, really, I'm sorry," stammered Ivy. Father Flanagan blessed her without reproach and moved on to the many, many others, visiting each one as long as necessary, well into the night. He was still making his rounds when Ivy fell asleep. The morning was clear, and Ivy felt well enough to be out on her own. The destruction was enormous, and when she saw the streetcar she'd been in, she felt weak. Father Flanagan had been right. Her survival must have been some kind of a miracle. She felt so grateful, but had no one to thank. Instead of having Easter egg hunts and spring dances, Omaha was filled with debris. The YMCA and the YWCA were a beehive of volunteers, so she pitched in for a couple days until trains were able to begin moving again. When she was finally moving west again, Ivy tried to settle into some kind of normal by pulling out her current copy of Woman Rebel. She received it monthly at home, and it made her feel that she could be in control, even as a woman. But the words just aimlessly rolled off her mind. Instead, she kept thinking of the destruction and of Father Flanagan's loving kindness until she was exhausted. She seemed to hear the train wheels whisper, "Go back, go back, go back, go back." At dawn, the train crossed the invisible boundary into Paiute lands, passing across the rising sun. Sharp morning shadows of the train made flickering windows of light and dark against the desert sand. Unseen to human eyes, just at the border, shadow animals began to leap aboard the train. Jackrabbit, chuckwalla, and cat. Sometimes the barest outline of them could be seen as shadows layered on shadows. Lizards scurried under seats. Cats sat and watched as if waiting for prey. Jackrabbits gathered around businessmen, thumping feet in unison like a drum circle. And with every mile, the train became more and more covered in the shadows of these unupits. The beat of the rabbits' feet louder and louder, the train's passengers completely unaware. Thickening swarms of small, unseen birds flew above as spirit escorts, their sharp beaks dripping red from being dipped in the blood of enemies. One bird swooped into the car where Ivy sat and perched above her seat. She'd been awake a while. It was only hours now until she would get off the train at Reno. Would Raider be there to meet her? Did she still love him, or would he still want her? Was there really any future there for her? And fear began to rise as she realized she could not go to Colorado or back to West Virginia. She had betrayed and deceived all who knew and loved her. There was no going back. Feeling trapped by her decisions, Ivy decided to go make herself look as presentable as possible to meet the moment. She stepped off the train with dignity and resolve. The unupits gathered like a column of smoke as the train neared Reno, dispersing into the desert skies. The drumming of the rabbit feet stopped. Mid-afternoon, the air clean and brisk, the train finally reached Reno. A clean smell of sage mingled with a little bit of rain greeted Ivy. A simple brick station didn't seem to indicate a wealthy town. Single wealthy men and women were met at the platform by hotel staff and duded-up cowboys. Feeling neglected, and not seeing Raider, Ivy followed his direction and bought a paper, immediately turning to the back, searching the small personals for Raider's address. A fight broke out among some loitering tramps. Beside her, one man was turning the other's face into mush with horseshoe brass knuckles. Ivy was backing out when she was grabbed from behind by her arm and pulled to safety. Images of Chicago flashed in her mind, and without thinking, she swung around only to hear Raider laugh. "Whoa, Nellie, Daddy's here." Her mouth dropped open with relief and shock in equal measures. Raider scooped her to him and covered her mouth with his. All her doubts vanished as Ivy felt safe and secure in Raider's arms, the past 6 months vanishing like a dream. Only now mattered. "I've been here every day for the last 3 weeks waiting for you." He kissed her again, deeply drinking in everything he denied himself. He picked up her bags, and she felt more blessed than all the wealthy single people trailing toward the Riverside Hotel for lonely drinks and small talk with strangers who pretended that they cared. But Ivy had her man. They had paid a huge price to be together, and now the prize was won. The future could only get brighter. Raider wasted no time, not even letting her stop to clean up. He drove her to the courthouse. "The judge is an acquaintance of mine," said Raider. "He said he'd marry us as soon as you arrived. No waiting." The brilliant copper dome on the courthouse had only begun to dim, its white columns branded with the scarlet lipstick of hundreds of kisses from elated divorcees celebrating their newfound freedom. Ivy felt she was walking in a dream, signing papers, saying "I do" in front of a stranger. Suddenly she was married, Mrs. Raider Thompson. No flowers, no fanfare, no friends. Just a spoken word, and it was done. Raider walked her to the riverside for a small meal and a drink to celebrate, allowing Ivy to catch her breath. The ring on her finger looked so odd. Walking along the beautiful Truckee River, glittering with the colors of early sunset, Raider wrapped his arm around her. On the white arched bridge, they saw 2 women standing together. One removed her ring with a dramatic flourish and threw it into the river. The 2 women hugged, crying, and walked toward the riverside, the distant Sierras making a cool and stoic backdrop. Here, it seemed, all roads led to either the courthouse or the hotel. Passing through the doors of the riverside was a shock to the senses. Loud talk, ragtime piano, fancy furnishings, all seemed so contrary to the peaceful river and the latent sadness of broken marriages. From the austere to the opulent, Reno was certainly a study in contrast. Raider and Ivy were seated in the dining room, almost uncertain of how to behave with one another. Ordering dinner, they began to relax into the reality that this was not a daydream. Their first course of an oyster cocktail served in grapefruit underscored the sensuality they were both beginning to dwell on. Ivy was becoming a little giddy on cognac, and Raider was already impatiently thinking about the night to come. Dessert of creamy, rounded Italian ice cream covered in cherries helped Raider's imagination along. Amidst the background of tinkling glasses, nervous laughter, and cigar smoke, a plump, bleach blonde with drink in hand began to sing. "Rhinoceros," Ivy heard a man behind her mutter with disdain. Her voice was reedy, drunken, and off-key, very roughly set to the tune of "We Will Gather at the River," a tune Ivy knew well. The raucous change of words jolted her. "O Nevada's silver state, land of treasure, house of divide, searchers here find what they already have in mind. City of broken vows, clearing house of illusion, filled with cast-off wives, we find freedom from convention as we cross the bridge of sighs." Nearly falling over, the flush blonde was caught by an admirer as she tried to bow to the enthusiastic applause for her impromptu performance. Raider caught Ivy's hand. He was anxious to go. The short drive was clear and cool, the stars brilliant, so refreshing after the riverside. Raider pulled up in front of the brand-new Overland Hotel. As he guided her through the lobby area, Ivy saw gun-toting cowboys sitting at poker tables stacked with bills. "Raider, they're gambling. We'll get in trouble with the law for being here." "Nonsense," he snorted. "This is Nevada. I just want you to think about me, about us." On the corner of the hotel, a cigar store also had cowboys and city men congregating together, watching a silent movie reel of a boxing match flickering on the wall. Ivy saw very few women and felt strange and small. Tipping the smirking bellhop, Raider swept Ivy into his strong arms, kicking open the door and carrying her across the threshold. This was her dream. Finally, after years of longing and denial, their bodies could join together in the passion they both longed for. Raider was hungry, a man of strong physical appetite. He could barely hold himself back. He owned her now, and she would not deny him. Practically tearing her clothing, he pushed her to the bed and took her more roughly than he intended. Quietly, in the corner, a faint shadow bird sat waiting. In the morning, Ivy was sore but deeply satisfied. Raider was already awake and having his coffee. It was always his nature to get up with the sun. It's Sunday, so I thought you could use a day to catch up. We can go shopping for our visit to the camps. How does that sound? Ivy was tenderly getting dressed and feeling hungry. It's Sunday. Surely stores won't be open. Raider laughed. Baby, in Reno, anything you want is available any time. He reached for her and sat her on his lap, beginning to make love to her again. Playfully, she pushed him away. Work before play, she teased. Fine. I'll go buy a paper and you eat breakfast. I'll be back in a bit. Ivy was glad for a little quiet time, even as she felt a little lonely. The last 24 hours had been so crazy. Their room at the Overland was simple, but she was glad to be away from the riverside, final destination for those making the divorce pilgrimage. Ivy thought about last night and Raider's lovemaking. He was everything she'd hoped for, strong, experienced, and passionate. She was excited for the nights to come. She looked at herself in the mirror, wondering if there was anything different she could see. Running her hands over her body, she rehearsed Raider's touch, closing her eyes, imagining their ecstasy. She had just begun to wonder what was keeping him when she heard him come in. Seeing him in the mirror, he seemed distracted. Is anything wrong? She asked. Raider laid down the paper with a pistol. Look, honey, I don't want you to worry, but you have to know the way it's going to be. We're going to some pretty remote places with a few rough people. Most of those folks are just great, but there's unrest among the miners. A lot of them are union guys. Ivy waited for him to continue. You're a smart girl. Read this, and you'll understand what I'm saying. Ivy looked at the huge newspaper headlines. Extra! Bombing at San Francisco Preparation Day Parade. 10 killed, 40 wounded in bloody attack. Radicals suspected of taking direct action. Waiter at St. Francis Hotel arrested for attempted poisoning of soup served to state and city leaders. Underscoring the headline was a ghastly photograph of a little girl who'd had her legs blown off. Raider continued. A lot of the union guys weren't too keen on the war, but this makes them look real bad. Some of those guys are un-American. I won't work bums, but mostly they're just working stiffs, and they are our customers. Here's the deal, Ivy. San Francisco is just over the mountains. If this violence spreads, it's hard to say who's going to get hurt. He handed her the gun. This is yours. I want you to carry it all the time under your clothes. We'll practice shooting it once we get out of town, but promise me you'll always keep it on you. Ivy nodded, turning the 6-shot .22 revolver over in her hand. They spent the rest of the day, pleasantly enough, shopping for supplies, field clothes for Ivy, and sharing coffee, a ham sandwich, and a slice of chocolate cake together, like any other broke young couple just getting started. Dinner was much simpler than the riverside, but they were both content with the day and each other's company. Raider was much more tender in his lovemaking that night, bringing Ivy to peaks she had never known were possible. She was no prude and had read a lot of banned literature in her pursuit of being a progressive woman, but Raider made her melt and beg for more. Well before dawn, Raider was stirring and woke Ivy up. Come on, honey, time to start the adventure. She was definitely not a morning person, but the excitement of the day got her moving, and soon they were on the road together, with the faithful Ford and Raider's canvas sling dentist chair. The little .22 felt awkward at first, but Ivy soon learned to ignore it. With Raider's guidance, Ivy quickly learned the daily routine of desert travel, although she had to figure some feminine ways of doing business. After the first couple times of answering nature's call in the treeless desert, Ivy followed pioneer custom and cut a slit in her drawers so she could squat with some measure of personal privacy. Like Raider, she came to love the rhythms of the Nevada landscape. Dead flat desert floor would slowly rise into the mountains, the brown giving way to green. Nevada mountains were so different from West Virginia. They weren't soft and round like a woman, but a brawny and bare-chested young man. She learned to like the taste of water from the clean canvas bag and the sharp, clean smell of sage burning in the evening campfire. She liked the little shivers she'd get when Raider would tell her scary stories he'd picked up on the road. He made the desert seem a magical place where anything could and did happen, a Nevada version of Arabian Nights. He liked to get her all worked up because it was always a whole lot of fun to cuddle up afterwards in their little canvas tent. Ivy was cleaning up the camp after supper when Raider started in on one of his stories, legs outstretched, pipe smoke swirling over his head. Let me tell you a true story I heard last year in Ely about a red ghost. Ivy wiped her hands and sat on a pack blanket next to him. The sun had set and a coyote pack gibbered in the distance, setting the mood as if on cue. Seems there was this young soldier sent to Arizona who wanted real bad to be a cavalryman, loved horses, but when he got to his post they gave him a camel instead, a fierce red beast that wouldn't hesitate to trample and bite a man to death. Now this soldier went all clammy with an unnatural fear of this camel. He somehow got it in his mind it was going to kill him, and no matter the amount of joshing or humiliation from his troop could get that out of his mind. So the sergeant decided they'd just tie him on to ride until he wasn't afraid. The young man couldn't disobey an order, so he got up on, and as soon as that boy was tied down, off that camel ran. The other fellows tried and tried but could never catch up with him, and that soldier was never again seen alive. His head was found a year later in the desert surrounded by red fur and camel track, and that hairy red beast has been seen from time to time with a headless rider tied to the saddle, usually when somebody was about to die a violent death. Ivy did shiver. Has anyone ever seen it in Nevada? Raider shook his head. Nope, but this is pretty wide open country, leaving it open-ended on purpose. She gave him a playful shove. Well, she said, I guess you'll just have to stay awake all night, alone, to keep us safe. I don't think so, he said, and he grabbed her and he kissed her. A small breeze began to blow. By morning, the breeze had become a full-blown windstorm. A dust devil snatched up their canvas shelter, tent pegs flying. Raider and Ivy fought to gather it up and drive on, slowly beating against the wind to Austin. The wind had subsided by the time they arrived. They crawled out of the Model T with stiff hair and grit buried deep in their ears and teeth. Raider set up shop almost immediately, having a few patients who had been putting off their extractions. The local alternative to a real dentist usually involved whiskey, a friend, and a pair of pliers. Often a root would break in the process, causing infection and abscess. Austin's boom days had passed, so they headed on down the road towards Eureka after just a few days. Eureka's mining days, though quieter, plugged steadily along, allowing Raider and Ivy to set up shop for a while. He had taken to having her wear a money belt in her drawers to hold all their money. Wearing both the .22 and the money belt made Ivy feel fat and vaguely used. Shouldn't he be protecting her, not making her a possible target? It was all about what worked and moved them together toward success. Sentiment had little room in Raider's grand vision. Ivy also felt increasingly uncomfortable with Raider's ease, not only among the miners, but the tough bars and brothels in the surrounding area. The Wise Owl Club boasted 24 hours a day, new brood of 20 chicks, featuring Pussyfoot Johnson, French-style circus girl, posted right next to their flyer. Really, Ivy huffed indignant. It just doesn't look good to have our name right there next to an ad for, she paused, pointing, that. Raider looked surprised. Obviously, that had never crossed his mind as standing in the way of business. Look, this isn't back east. A man doesn't judge another's business. It's live and let live, and we all make money. Ivy didn't respond. She did not like his fraternization around the edges of immoral women, but she wasn't sure that she could do much about it, so she said nothing. Working out of the back of a local saloon, a fit old man with lean legs and a fuzzy-faced dog came in for a drink later that day. Howdy, Tom, the bartender hailed. Howdy, Rooster. Sit. The dog, Rooster, obediently lay down at his master's feet. Water and whiskey, he ordered. A glass of water and half bottle of whiskey were set on the table. Tom gave Rooster a drink out of the water glass, then poured the whiskey in the same glass for himself. The bartender spoke over the bar to Tom. So, what's the news? Heard they caught that fellow who killed that stage driver up in Jarbidge last winter. Yeah? Who was it? Fellow named Cool. You ever meet him? Don't think so. Caught him by matching a bloody palm print left on a piece of mail. Damn clever. Tom took a breath and a drink. Never did find the money, though. Ivy had come over, petting the dog, listening to the conversation. Noticing her, he took off his hat and extended his hand. Name's Tom Twaddle, ma'am. Now Ivy was on familiar ground. She knew how to get a man's attention and information out of him. Talk of money had her attention. Continuing to pet Rooster, she talked with Tom, gathering details of the robbery, the murder, the trial, until he was out of whiskey and Raider was out of clients. Raider walked over looking a little put out. He pulled up a chair protectively next to Ivy, shooting her a "what the hell are you doing" look. Tom took his leave, Rooster trailing obediently behind. After ordering supper, Raider began to scold Ivy under his breath. His attitude changed as she filled him in. Jarbidge was a humming mining town still in its prime. Although remotely situated at the bottom of a steep canyon, hundreds were making their way there, and then there was the missing payload. Ivy could see Raider thinking. They planned to make a complete circuit of the main mining towns, but this detour seemed too good to pass up. They completed their plans over steak and beans, preparing for an adventure that would change their lives.